Welcome to Golden Rule Radio, a source for a short weekly podcast to help the precious metals investor stay ahead of the curve. Each week we'll focus on what's happening in the markets related to the metals, the news that moves those markets, and what's on the horizon next week, of which the precious metals investor should be aware. We are precious metals brokers with over 30 years of experience who follow this information all day, every day, and want to just keep you apprised. That being said, today, January 11th, we will briefly recap the metals in terms of 2016 and touch base on what has transpired thus far in 2017. We're also going to touch base on the dollar index, global currencies, central banks, and interest rates. And that being said, I'm going to underhand soft toss to you, Miles, in regards to 2016.
Thanks, Tori. Well, last year, we actually had a great year in all the precious metals. I'm actually going to start at the bottom of the list with gold. Gold started the year off at about $1,062, and for the first 7 months of the year, a $300+ rise. And so by July, we're up about 30%. We did have a healthy correction back down, a lot of which followed after the Trump election and the expectation for I don't know what. But we did have
happy days are here.
Yeah, I guess so. The Dow rise, which we'll talk about the Dow rise.
Not a good
here
investment
in a
strategy. Hope is not a good investment strategy.
So we corrected back down to about 1128 and ended the year off at 1150, so about an 8.5% rise in gold. One interesting thing I did want to point out is if you look at the bottom of the gold market compared to in 2015 compared to the top of the market in 2016, we do have some Fibonacci correction levels that we bounced off of, and our most recent bottom in gold, that 1128 I mentioned, was at one of those fib levels. So we could see some good rises coming in gold for the first half of 2017.
What about the white metals, Robert?
Well, palladium was the winner, up 21% from last year, and platinum
Huge.
up just 1.2%, but platinum is extremely undervalued, and we'll talk about that later.
Well, and silver up 15.75%. I mean, what we've seen in both of those instances is a tightening of the gold-silver ratio as well as a tightening of the platinum to palladium ratio. And like Robert talked about, we'll get into further detail on that, but that is not insignificant when you're structuring your metals portfolio. And those numbers have continued in 2017 so far. Gold up 3%, silver up 5%, platinum 8%, palladium 11%. I mean, what are you guys thinking that's indicative of?
Starting this year, we've had a little bit of a rise, and I think it may continue a little bit farther before we run into some resistance. Gold probably will run into resistance. Where do you guys think? 1210, 1220, 1250, maybe as high as that before we see a little bit of a pullback. But this is a seasonally strong part of the year, January, February, March. So I expect to see higher numbers in the first quarter.
I think that's a general consensus sentiment that really has flipped since the first of the year.
Yes.
Not just at our brokerage firm, but in general.
Yeah, if you look over the last 3 years, I mean, we just talked about the beginning of 2016, a 30% rise. You scroll back on the chart a little bit. Beginning of 2015, we had a 15% rise. And beginning of 2014, a 17% rise. All of those followed a November or December bottom in the metals prices. So I don't want to allude to patterns since as soon as you see one, it stops working. But it is interesting that we've had that happen over the last couple years. I think the two big questions right now is what's our new president going to do come next Friday when he takes office? And then, of course, are we going to see that magic 20K number on the Dow that everybody's hoping for?
The enthusiasm for that seems to be dissipating. And the longer that it happens and doesn't break 20, the more negative traders are going to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the numbers are indicating that stalling type of effect. I mean, you're up 0.5 point on the Dow Industrials average, S&P 1.3, Dow Transport's 1.4, and those all pale in comparison to the metals so far. And so you look, at those markets, and when we talk about those averages, we're going to be really trying to correlate that to the relationship with the metals markets, and you can call us in that regard as well. But transitioning there, our eyes are on those markets, but to you guys, our eyes are probably even more so on the currency markets, because that's what our life centers around, is measuring the value of metals in various currencies. So U.S. dollar index, why don't you lead us that way here a little bit, Miles, and talk about what's going on?
Well, dollar index has been taking those incremental 2-point steps up, 97, 99, 101, 103, got up to about 103.8, and then it's fallen off from there. So love to see the dollar move above 104. that would certainly signify strength. Everybody's talking about this great march in the dollar, but you look at the long-term charts, we're still quite a bit off the highs. Going back over the last 20, 30 years, 1986, we're looking at the dollar index up in the 125-ish range. So as strong as it may feel right now, it's good to remember what the dollar has done over the course of my lifetime and compare that to things like precious metals and oil, which have just continued to march up.
Well, that's right. Compare, because it's all relative, and the relative value of that U.S. dollar index is all dependent on, well, maybe not all, but mostly dependent on those other currencies, yuan, yen, euro, and those other currencies just seem to be lacking interest.
Well, and strength, yeah, really. Their
euro,
concerns are greater than ours.
It may come to parity with the dollar. We've been talking about that for a while, and a few years ago we were in Europe, and it was 1.4 something. Now it's 1.05, roughly 1.06, coming into parity. I mean, we said a number of weeks ago that Britain may not have an EU to exit from.
That's right. And to your point, Robert, you've got a 13-year high in the dollar index and yet a 300% increase in the price of gold. So it's not about the strength of the currency as much as it is the relative strength.
The yen is toast. How else do you say that with a country who has a debt to GDP ratio as high as Japan?
Well, as long as we all agree the Emperor of Japan has no or is wearing clothes, then we can pretend that.
Well, David and Kevin on the McAlvany Weekly Commentary talk about the yen this week, as well as I think they're going to be talking about it with Russell Napier next week.
Well, they're certainly going to be talking about debt because that is Russell Napier's wheelhouse.
Well, and that's we have
yen.
a record debt to GDP ratio right now in the United States, and that is the yen. That's
it's
these
global
currency manipulations.
It's going to shake up global trade.
You bet.
Big time.
Transitioning there, that's all a result of central bank intervention and the games that they're playing. And what do you guys see going on in terms of 2017 interest rate moves, and just to try to give our listener a basic indication?
Well, two guys who are or should be on everyone's radar, Bill Gross and Jeffrey Gundlach. Gross said that if the 10-year Treasury moves above 2.6, that's the end of the bond bull market. Gundlach had a little bit of a higher interest rate. He named 3%. So in that range between 2.6 and 3% on the 10-year Treasury, if that yield moves above that, they say the end of the bond market is over. And how long has it been going on? 30-something years now?
Yeah, it's got to be running out of steam here.
That's going to unravel in a really bad way.
Yeah.
There's so much money in the bond market. Just a tad bit of the bond market money moving out of there and going after something of finite quantity like gold jumps gold, $100 a day?
Well, and not only that, but again, it goes right back to the relative value. So go to pricedingold.com and you'll see how you can measure the value, the true value of cost of goods in the gram or the ounce of gold price. So
Tori, you have listed here Dow versus gold only been 5 times higher in the history of the Dow Industrials on priced in gold.
Yeah. So
higher
when you price the Dow,
not 500%.
Yeah, that's right. So, only 5 times in history have we seen it this high previously. And so we do those things. We watch the Dow gold ratio and relative prices, and then we give our listeners and we give our clients who we work with on a daily basis recommendations on the specific metals. And so I want to wrap this up and let's cut down to the chase, starting with you, Robert. Number one metals recommendation right now.
Well, it's a fantastic time to be buying, and any weakness, I'd be a buyer, even if we see a little bit lower prices because of the dollar rising a little bit. But there's such a lack of interest, it seems, in metals in the United States that premiums on U.S. coins are as low as they've ever been.
Record
Is that
lows.
Fair to say?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Record lows.
Our numismatist would back that up.
that
He's got 35 plus
product.
years with just this company, and yeah. So double eagles.
Yeah, various grades.
How about you, Miles?
There's sweet spots in those double eagles where we could talk about that if people wanted to call.
I'm going to go a little bit of a different direction and get back to the idea of relative values, which is you'll hear us harp on over and over and over again. For me, I think your biggest plays in the metals right now is if you're sitting in a palladium position, it's time to move to platinum. And if you don't have a small position in platinum,
crazy
as a piece of your metals position. I mean, it's insanely cheap compared to gold, and it's insanely cheap compared to its sister metal, other white metal, palladium. So for anybody looking to do their IRA additions before the 2016 taxes are due, I'd look at something like that.
How would you like to buy gold at $980? $1,000.
That's right.
That's like buying platinum today.
That's right.
That's what it looks like, about a 20%.
I agree, or maybe even $700
Or
with
less,
silver,
yeah.
right? So, well, we appreciate you listening. We're going to see you next Thursday. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at ICA Gold for the latest updates from Golden Rule Radio, and subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also obviously always give one of our experienced advisors at ICA a call at 800-525-9556 if you have any questions or interest in precious metals investing. And we've been at this since 1972, and we would love to spend 10 to 15 minutes with your specific portfolio. As Robert alluded to, again, the McAlvany Weekly Commentary next week, interviewing Russell Napier, a must listen. And for Robert and Miles, this is Tori signing off with Golden Rule Radio.